Welcome everybody to our final panel session. We have two of our speakers who you've already met before, Florence and Anis. In addition to that, we've got Professor Kang on the end, who has, as Jian mentioned earlier, has recently joined us from the University of Sheffield as Professor in Acoustics at UCL, reopening that important area of built environment research. We've got sitting next to him Jemima Unwin, who is a lecturer in light and lighting and director of the MSc in light and lighting in the IEDE, and Professor Davies here on the end, who is a previous director of the IEDE and is now leading the CUSH project, which is an interdisciplinary international research program looking at built environment and urban health, amongst other things. So I think we're going to kick off without further ado. I'm a bit of a hard taskmaster in terms of panel chairing, so I've already warned our panellists that I'm going to time them for 5 minutes. They get to speak 5 minutes each, and then a horrible noise will come out of my phone. And then they'll either sit down or bear the consequences. And the question that I've asked them each to address, given that this is celebrating 40 years of environmental design and engineering, I've asked them to look forward 40 years from the perspective of each of their own disciplines or their own fields of practice or research. And to answer the question, what's the most important trend or idea that will shape human health and well-being over the next 40 years? So given that we've got some technical issues, I'm going to ask Florence to kick off, because then we can get the video out of the way and we can all relax. Apart from that, yeah, everybody will just pass the microphone along. There's if you can speak into one of those, or maybe one of these.
Sarah, maybe before you play that, I just want to say a few things. Since I had a 20-minute slot earlier, so I thought I'll have a video instead of me talking for 5 minutes. But in any case, I just want to say, in this digital age, we'll expect to have a complete transformation of our lifestyle, and definitely lighting as well. And but how we design and what we design with, definitely with something has changed. But hopefully, the ultimate goal, what we're trying to do as lighting designers, is to ensure the human health and well-being. And so to build cities' resilience and also communities while we're tackling the climate change as well. And this video is about a vision of how the future looks like regarding urban lighting. So it's not just an external, but also it's a touch on the building. So it does answer Sarah's question in a bit so wider context, but hopefully you enjoyed it. But the research behind it is looking at a lot of emerging technologies, is how some of these can be applied in the future. And it's just one of our vision. We just welcome any comment. I'm quite sure that you'll spot something that may be out of date already. So thank you, Sarah.
Increasingly, our work and social lives take place after dark. The 24-hour economy is vital in bringing prosperity to our cities and giving us shared spaces to relax and play. But our cities were originally designed to be used in the daytime, and how they work when the sun goes down has too often been just an afterthought. As our cities become bigger, they'll need more energy to keep running. To meet this demand, cities will need efficient and resilient new approaches to how lighting works. Thanks to the Internet of Things, our streets will become choreographed, with vehicles and infrastructure working together. As cars pass, street lights will dim automatically, ensuring safety while avoiding excessive light and wasting energy. By using augmented reality, we can shape cities to fit our moods and needs. Rather than being inundated with advertising, our public spaces will be customised for each of us. Seamless connectivity, combined with decentralised power supplies, will change how we view and engage with urban spaces. Citizens will come together to transform dark corners into street parties, fuelled by their own movements thanks to energy harvesting pavements. As wearable technology helps us understand our bodies, if we choose to share our personal data with the city, it will adapt to help our well-being. And being safe doesn't always have to mean being constantly bathed in light. As technologies get smaller and smarter, we will see dark skies return to our cities for the first time in 100 years. As humans, we'll be able to get back into sync with the natural cycles of our days and the wildlife that surrounds us. Designing a truly 24-hour city means more than just being smart with artificial light. It also means making the most of daylight, both indoors and out. Mastering how we harvest solar power and harness daylight can mean better building performance, savings, and a more natural experience for city dwellers. Here at Arup, we want to make cities across the world more resilient to the challenges of the future, while also being safe and fun places to live. This is just one vision for the future of lighting in cities. Join the conversation at arup.com/nighttime and tell us about yours. Arup, we shape a better world.
I think I echo Florence's comments. In world of acoustics, at the moment, when we say, is this environment good or bad in terms of acoustics, we normally say it's 50 dB, therefore should be good. Whether you like it or not, should be good. That's satisfied regulation. But that's not all the story. Research shows actually dB or physics only account for 30–40% of people's perception of quality. So I think the future will be acoustics integrating perception. So that's what we are doing at the moment. We hope in next 5 years we will develop something called soundscape indices. So later on, 5 years time, when we say, is that area good? We say the soundscape indices is 8 out of 1 to 10. So this will integrate people's perception, like who are listening to the place, who are you listening with, where are you listening, not just the dB level. So I hope this will lead the way, shape the world in the next 40 years. That's my 3 minutes.
Even better. Yep.
If I still have 2 minutes, I'll. Okay. Yeah. I have been doing acoustics for 30 years. In first 15 years, I've been always concentrating on numbers, trying to develop simulation software, very accurately simulate sound field. But from about 10–15 years ago, I realized that's only part of the story. And that's why we try to integrate or transfer based on acoustics, but also integrate perception. So that's my vision since last 10–15 years, and this has been reflected from industrial support. There's an EU directive at the moment, ask every city to identify quiet area to protect it. But what's quiet is not just lower dB, but also people's perception. So that's also my personal effort, not just the general tendency from industry. That's my 5 minutes, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think for lighting, there's a few issues which I think will affect our health and well-being in the future. One really important issue is daylight. So we still don't know quite fundamental things like information about the light-dark cycle and the amplitude of that. So how dark can dark be and how light can light be to support well-being. Also duration, so duration of both light and dark. So these are really quite basic things which we don't really have answers to at the moment. Another one is lighting control. So we have the technology to do pretty much anything we want. quite cheaply actually, not necessarily expensive. And you know, we don't know what to do with it, or we've got all these options, yet we haven't designed it for people yet. It's a bit like with Florence's video, we have all this cool stuff going on, but we've got to kind of go back to fundamentals and look at how that relates to people's behaviour, where they walk, how they move, what they do, and use all this amazing potential for the good of people. Lighting controls, yeah, smart cities, yeah, that type of thing. Yeah, so we've got, you know, like with autonomous vehicles now and light sources like LEDs in cities, environments are changing dramatically. So I think it's becoming more and more important to think about what the implications of that are for people. So I'd say, in a way, it's a lighting equivalent of Jian Kang's acoustics. It's the human perception becomes really important and at the centre of experience. Yeah, lightscape, yeah. 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 There you
go. I think it's one of the most difficult questions that I've been asked when I was thinking about it. 40 years, many things will happen in 40 years. 20 years ago, this didn't exist. All the Internet of Things, all technology have changed a lot. We're relying more on it. It has changed our life for the good or for the bad. So I'm just going to close my eye and imagine a bit. I think probably it would go into a direction of finding the right balance between the planet and the people. We do belong to Earth. I think as a human, we weren't designed to stay indoors. When we talked about building industry for the last, I don't know how many centuries, we're all tried to optimize and enhance our indoor comfort. This, for a reason or another, probably has jeopardized our health and well-being, that now we are looking again at it. We want to be outdoors, we want to walk, we want to use stairs, we want to have more daylight. Liking it or not, there is an impact on humans by the circadian rhythm. So you would feel that we belong outside, so finding the harmony of living with our environment would be key. We're bringing nature indoor by saying, oh, we have a tree indoor, we have an indoor garden. But do we want to bring nature in where they don't belong, or we want to go outside? Technology is moving fast, but if we use it to enhance our life and facilitate it, that will be really beneficial. We're not having time to use this technology to tell me if this park is less polluted than the other, so I'm going to go to that park. I think finding the right balance in our life is key for our happiness and for our well-being. Maybe we should focus more and more on ourselves in our design and let the technology help us and drive us. And really respect our planet, understand the issue that we have, because based on the science and some of the slides that are presenting, probably in 20 years' time we'll have major issues that might not lead us to the next 40 years. So there will be a lot of actions to take for people from all the brains around this room and outside this room to work and think together how to be in a better place, how to join forces and not be selfish. Not sure if I used my 5 minutes. I can't keep on talking, but
I think that covers it.
Thank you.
All right.
So Sarah has to say something about the most important trend or idea. And within the built environment, I think it's hugely important that there's growing acknowledgement that there are three key challenges which are very strongly interlinked. And these three interlinked challenges are firstly the urgent need to reduce environmental footprints of buildings and cities, and alongside this to increase resilience to environmental change. And vitally, and integrated with those first two challenges, to promote and protect health. So that integration of those three key challenges, I think, is absolutely essential and is a really kind of key idea that we'll need to adhere to as we move forward. For example, in the last decade, there's been some very significant progress, I think, made in trying to understand what the co-benefits might be of carbon emission reduction strategies. So to try to, I suppose, put forward the fact that it's all not bad news, there is good news and there are potential co-benefits, but also trying to tease apart the potential unintended consequences of these strategies. So relating to those key ideas are three key principles, I think, and that's firstly, perhaps the need to provide cutting-edge scientific evidence to support evidence-based decision-making. For example, in providing a clear set of measurable objectives, and that's particularly challenging, I think, as we look to adaptation-related issues. Secondly, to treat the built environment as a complex system, to recognise that it is a complex system and to treat it as such, and to bring systems thinking to bear in a robust way. But those first two principles, I would argue, are almost worthless if policymakers don't engage with that process. So I would say the third key principle is the need for a participatory framework and to properly engage an appropriate set of stakeholders, including policymakers. I just want to give a very quick example within my 5 minutes, perhaps relating to overheating in buildings. We've heard a little bit about that today. And that in itself is a really key and vital issue. In the UK today, it's a best estimate is around 2,000 premature deaths due to overheating, and that's expected to rise to something like 7,000 by the 2050s under projected climate change. So it's a really key issue. A lot of people are dying, perhaps needlessly, each year as a result of that. If I can just take the issue of overheating in homes to exemplify what are some challenging issues relating to those issues I've mentioned before, so scientific evidence, complex systems and policy-related issues. To meet mitigation targets in the UK, it's something like 1 home per minute needs a very deep energy efficiency retrofit to be completed on it, and I would argue that's probably not happening at the moment. But vitally alongside those mitigation actions, adaptation needs to be addressed at the same time. So examples of scientific evidence that needs to be brought to bear. I mentioned measurable objectives. I would argue it's still unclear even what the comfort targets should be for home temperatures. We have some information about that, but it's far from complete, I think, and it has important implications. If the targets are too onerous, then air conditioning will be encouraged and installed in new dwellings perhaps prematurely to comply with the regulations, an example of a negative unintended consequences. And as well as a lack of temperature targets for comfort, there's also not any clear guidance on temperature targets for health at the moment, I would argue. And with regard to systemic complexities, the optimal strategies for insulating properties, I would say, is not yet fully sorted. There are complex links with moisture-related problems, for example. The ventilation of properties, window opening, we know can reduce temperatures, but can also possibly increase indoor pollutant concentrations. And the adaptation subcommittee has called for a standard or regulation to be put in place to reduce the risk of overheating in new homes. It's not in place yet. It raises issues, I think, about how we effectively engage with policymakers. MHCLG have recently funded some relevant work, and we await the outcome of that project. So, in summary, then, if I have 15 seconds to summarise.
Yeah,
oh, it's marvellous.
I shouldn't have shown him.
Three interlinked challenges to building sustainable cities: reducing the environmental footprint, increasing resilience to environmental change, and promoting and protecting health at the same time. And then 3 related key principles: the provision of scientific evidence, systems thinking, and a participatory framework to engage properly with policymakers. That's exactly 5 minutes.
You even had 23 seconds.
23 seconds left.
But you win nearest the pin,
okay.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Hector Altamirano. I'm the course director of the Environmental Design and Engineering course. Most of the discussion now was about cities, but given the technology that we have and may have in the future, shouldn't we think on how to think on living outside the cities and keep the level of that we have at the moment, let's say in the countryside, instead of continue thinking about cities?
I think a lot of this sort of future envisioning will need to start with a megatrend, and urbanisation is definitely a megatrend that it's the UN predictions of 70% of the world population is going to be living in cities by 2050, something like that, if not earlier. So it's whether there's an individual preference of rather not live in cities or not. There is going to be such a trend, and also we need to think about in the developing countries that they will still be going through a phase that's following the developed cities, developed countries of what the kind of lifestyle they're aspiring to. So I think it is important, and the solution that we talked about in the cities doesn't mean that it stopped at the building envelope. It will also apply, and we always, and I think we have been a lot of the time researching, teaching, educating individual disciplines at the human individual building occupant level. Where the gaps are is actually think wider, because if we can't get a city's planning right, there's already a limitation of how well we can deal with buildings itself.
I think for soundscape study, there's no boundary between urban and landscape or rural area. The principles and methods or design tools will be similar. Although most of our case studies are cities, but we will also do maybe 20–30% of kind of rural area study.
I don't know exactly what will be happening. Your question is very valid. Probably all of us maybe at some point in time will say, oh, we want to relax, go back to some rural areas. But we as a human, we're very social. So there are many reasons why people move to cities from the beginning. Being economical reason, being pursuing education. Now, yes, with the progress of technology, many things will be in place. You could probably study from somewhere standing alone, but there is this aspect of interaction that even the virtual reality cannot give you. It's about being with people around you, which no matter what technology brings you, I don't think it's going to happen. Actually, we're lacking it these days. Everything is through Skype, through other tools. You're talking to your parents, to your friends. People are not interacting more, and I think we're bearing the consequences. So I think understanding the reasons why people move to cities, and if you can provide these elements to them, then probably there might be a way to create that balance. And again, cities are of different sizes. So you can basically have sub-cities, have satellite cities, and or mega cities. As long as you provide for people what they're looking for in terms of healthcare, education, social, economic, I think, yes, probably the answer could be, yes, we could start relying on smaller scale cities.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree, of course, that I don't think we should ignore the non-urban environments, but I think cities may offer really the most important opportunity to address in an integrated way these intellect challenges of sustainability, resilience and health. And I think as well as the enormous challenges that come with that, I think there are huge opportunities. So I think we have to give a lot of attention to cities without, of course, forgetting that people will still live in the non-urban environment.
Hi, Duncan Wilson from Bartlett CASA, so Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis. Really interesting conversations around kind of how I guess the vision might change, and we saw lots of different technologies being described there. And it's a question about the skills for both for the students who might be joining these courses in the future, but also the staff that maybe are teaching on these courses. And how much do you think the skill set needs to change or will develop over the next 5 or 10 years? How much of it will still be kind of the core fundamental science that we're teaching, and how much of it will be the requirement to mix that in with things like Internet of Things technologies or the digital tools that will enable the science to be used in different ways?
Yes, I think it is really important that we move with the times and are ahead of the curve, so that we are shaping industry rather than trying to catch up all the time. The challenge is that obviously it's changing so fast that how on earth do you get ahead of something when these are the Californian tech giants are doing this stuff way before the construction industry has kind of woken up to it all. So I would say there's a few really important things. One is to ensure students have critical thinking skills and being able to establish good questions that will help them grow and find their own place in the industry later, and know how to do that when the world's changing so fast. And also to understand that all the amazing tech opportunities are a tool. It's not like a means to an end. Like a software isn't lighting design. It's just a way to lead to something that could be good, or answer some really interesting research question that can inform their design work later. So I do think it's good we have to know exactly what's going on and ensure our students do, but always ensure that it's a tool for them.
What a great question, Duncan. I really liked the idea that Dan was saying earlier about this transdisciplinary design studio linking architectural design engineering together in a studio space to learn. But I would challenge whether we should go even further, because in the digital world with all the technologies, there are other departments within the UCL that really do focus a lot more on the virtual side, the digital side, the data side, and how we can really use those opportunities, capturing big data and doing data analytics so that you get better insight on patterns or why people behave in a certain way in this really complex world. And system thinking is good, but having data that human work with machine to think better and design better for the future, rather than just look at the past statistics come up from data, so that we can really create something more. And so if those studios can actually push a bit more into some other kind of digital labs or something, that the students are encouraged to come together from different disciplines to have these questions that at the boundaries on different disciplines that Alan was talking about earlier, that they can come together and try to address and crack it. That would be fantastic. And I think there's also the way beyond just teaching is research as well.
Jump in with a chair's response perhaps to some of what you said earlier, and a question which maybe all of you might like to address in some ways. One of the things that struck me from your video earlier, Florence, was this idea of the 24-hour city, and the people will be having street parties, and I thought, I really don't want to be living on that corner next to the street party, because it may be well lit and it may also be quite noisy, and that a lot of these, particularly the techno-optimist kind of views of the city, I think perhaps overlook sources of conflict within cities. So that's the other part of, you know, sometimes wanting to go back to the rural lifestyle, is that you don't have to deal with some of the negative interactions that we have in cities, and that's perhaps something we don't often talk about from a health and wellbeing perspective, is that sometimes urban living isn't that great. So maybe, and noise in particular in urban soundscapes can be a massive source of conflict and have huge impacts on people's well-being in a way that we don't, isn't as easily associated as, say, increased mortality from overheating or poor air quality. So, so maybe if some of you could talk about some of those downsides and how you're addressing them in your research and your practice looking forward.
Yeah, I think our research shows if in a public space, if sound level is higher than 65 dB, most people will be annoyed, and this will also cause health problem. So if that's the case, we must use engineering solution to reduce noise first. But below that, it's much more complicated. Some people like it, like you think that's noisy, but other people think that's lively. And one place, old people like it because they're more natural sound, like bird sound, but the young people don't like it because there's no artificial sound. So for that range, we need to think about different people's need, design for different people. We can't design people, but we can design for people. So I think that's a kind of principle. First, ensure health, then heart health problem, and then we need to think about promote health rather than reduce negative health effect.
Yeah, and I guess there's a key conflict here, because we've all talked about, also another thing to balance is this difference between quantitative measures and a lot of, you know, the environmental standards, design standards, regulatory standards and so forth that give a number like 65 dB. And that perception issue. So how do you see design and then perhaps also regulation and planning moving forward into that grey area between, you know, the number that's designed for the man on the Clapham omnibus who is usually working full time and, you know, maybe relatively healthy, and this vast difference in perception, as you said?
Yeah, I think previously the assumption is if there's a number, everyone should follow it, or everyone will feel the same. But the new model is whether the quality of space is good or bad, depending on who are using it. So user is one of the input. So this place may be good for one kind of people, but not good for other kind of people. So then we can decide who are we designing for. So it becomes more complicated, but that's a fact. We can't too much simplify it.
Thanks. So you mentioned a project that we've recently, in the introduction of the project that we've recently started, and in attempting to kind of grapple with these complex sets of issues, in our initial engagements with the cities, we're using, I suppose, a systems thinking type of approach to provide a structure to those initial conversations. And Nikki Zimmerman is leading a process of participatory system dynamics, which some of you may be familiar with, but it's basically pulling together an appropriate group of stakeholders of knowledge and experience of that particular city or that particular environment, and trying to identify with them over a series of workshops initially what do they think the problem is, to have a clear definition of the problem or range of problems, and then hear from each of them their kind of map of that problem, and then gradually bring those maps together. So you end up with one, at that point it's a qualitative kind of causal map, which is enormously complex initially, but starts to identify connections that weren't in any one person's head. So you can start to tease out these issues that perhaps, if you just have very kind of single focus policies, you perhaps run the risk of ignoring. And then, as I say, you're then left with this almost bewilderingly complex map. But then via a formal process, you can reduce that to something which is rather more manageable and hopefully useful at that qualitative stage. And then the way we've been working is then to try to use that to focus some of the more detailed modelling, the whole kind of range of different, the multidisciplinary modelling, to use that systems thinking to kind of structure our initial modelling, which we can then go back to the cities and say, well, look, across these range of issues you've identified, here's our first pass at what we think might be some initial thought, and then have this iterative process with cities to try to make sure that we don't leave anything glaring out. And I mean, I think the classic example is the use of diesel to reduce carbon emissions, but not recognising perhaps early enough, or not giving it enough weight, that it would inevitably have important health impacts. And that's really kind of set us down this path of not moving perhaps quickly enough to electric vehicles, and down this kind of cul-de-sac of diesel vehicles. Anyway.
I love to generate controversial kind of discussion, and this is one of the purposes of the videos as well. And it is a good challenge because we're looking at 30, 40 years later. And I would say 30, 40 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined my sons to be quite happy to be sitting with their friends and just talking to them via WhatsApp rather than face-to-face, or so they're sharing the same table. So it's something that we can't predict, but people are social, and there's a tendency people just really want to get together, whether they have a party or not, there's questions. But if there's the next generation, that's a project that we're dealing with, have to do with co-living, co-working, co-creating, and what would it become next? Don't know, but I think it's one of these big trends that's going on, and something's happening, is how we can start using that and compose a possible pictures, and then research take a long time to put into practice. And what should we be doing now? I think this will help to inspire. So if that can potentially be a stress issue, what could be put in place? Maybe that's why we need better planning.
Yeah, and I guess, Ines, what I'm interested in from the big global kind of design firm is, to what extent are these participatory processes informing your practice? Because we can see the great technological integrated systems of a master plan for a as yet not built city. And so one of the challenges there is, how do you involve citizens who aren't actually in place yet? But to what extent is your practice being informed by participatory stakeholder processes rather than the big multinational, you know, Starchitect firm just responding to another powerful government or, you know, private sector client.
Thank you. In the design or all practices, try to design for the people, and to tie a bit with the conversation that we were having earlier on technologies. I mean, technology is advancing really fast that probably we can't bear with this, with these changes, with these drastic changes. We're talking about noise. I mean, probably the future with electric cars, we might not have a lot of issues with noise. Maybe the future of air conditioning as well will be different. We wouldn't have this background noise in this room. But to go back to your questions, in the vision that you set for projects for the future, mainly cities, because in a building you can build it in the next average 5-10 years or less. On cities, it's a vision for the future. It takes more time, and probably by the time the city or even the building these days are built, the technology is more advanced. So all disciplines have to be always ahead of the curve in understanding what's happening on the level of tech, and understand how people are interacting for it. And it doesn't only relate to human health and well-being. It relates to everything around us. I mean, talking about buildings, you're talking about the technology in glass. So the shape of architecture and will change. Envelopes will change. Envelope of building, vertical transport would change. Same with the smartness of the buildings and the cities. So going back to principles in these kind of situations is always important, and understanding people's need, understand people's issues, health and well-being requirement, and how they could coexist in the future. I mean, part of as well the first question that was raised is the good thing about UCL and the masters that I've done probably nearly 20 years ago, and it's been going for 40 years now, is this evolution and this thinking outside the box is what the future would need. But with the presence of artificial technology, what would be the jobs that probably our children or grandchildren will not do, and what will be the impact of the invasion of robotics on our life? Yes, probably a site under construction is noisy, but will robots be building the sites in the future? Will be built by drones? Probably. When? I don't know, but the sky is the limit these days. And ensuring that we have the right policy, ensuring that we're not destroying our planet, ensuring that we're trying to rely more and more on renewable energy, renewable material, renewable technology to be able to coexist with this planet for the next years or decades is quite key. So the question is like, all of these are just food for thought for all of us to think, but I don't think there is one answer. The vision that was presented in the video earlier, it might appeal for many people, especially the young generation. I might probably want to go back home to Lebanon and go to the mountains and sit there and in a kind of a rural area, but we're designing cities and buildings and built environment for many generations to come. And we have to understand the issues and what's coming as well in terms of, they're not aliens, but in terms of artificial intelligence, how they're going to shape it.
And I would just like to add that the world is getting much smaller. And talking about the smart cities, there is one that I'm aware of that's been built and in progress of even growing as well, the new Songdo city in Korea. And when it was presented to probably more of this part of the world, there is a lot of negativity because it's so kind of meticulously planned and designed, and worry that cities no longer develop in an organic way for people. It's almost people becoming robots, then you enjoy it. But having said that, in Korea, there's a very different culture, and probably at the time those who's moved in as residents are also more attuned and comfortable using technologies, and they're sort of younger generation, young family as well. So they seem to have a very different perception. So I think it is very important that when we do envision and do this master planning is also do the sort of non-engineering, non-design perspective, looking at anthropologies and other aspects of how it might fit into a certain culture or the expectation of the demographics, people that's going to move in there. So we need to cross a lot more disciplines.
My question is about urban lighting. And to be honest, when I first came to London, I feel London is dark at night. Yeah, compared to China, I come from China, and most Asian city, like the lighting, urban lighting is darker. But I don't know how, like, what's your opinion, like, when you design a good urban lighting, because in China, we consider, like, the brighter, more bright, then can increase consumption, increase, attract more people, attract to more tourists, so increased consumption, economy. I don't know, like, in your opinion, what is a good lighting? Maybe you feel it's too bright in Asian cities. So what's your opinion about make the balance in the
China is too bright?
Yes.
That's my opinion. And there could be a lot of complex issues, but having said that, China is the kind of the biggest manufacturer's base that supply 90% of the lighting equipments in the world. So there's also maybe a reason why they're also very comfortable of putting a lot of cheap lighting up as well, and not with very much glare control, and that's given perception is very bright. But if you actually look at where the light arrives at services that it need to arrive at, it's actually putting light in the wrong place. It's more of just blinding you than actually lighting the place at all. So it probably will take time, I think, for them to learn. And as I said earlier, a lot of cities, up-and-coming cities, thought brighter is better. Brighter means prosperity, but brighter means they can afford it. So it's a wrong perception. And but then when you look at cities, even in London, going to the high-end residential area compared with more of the sort of low-cost housing, the way how lighting the space is lit is quite different as well. So this quality just come with price? I hope not. And hopefully there will be a generation's view like returning to China and be able to influence what's the right kind of standards or requirements are, and so that they can aspire to it.
And you mentioned that bright lights are good for tourism, but actually there's now a whole dark sky movement where dark skies are good for tourism too. So it works both ways.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I'm not knowing really anything about lighting, this is where it was interesting for me to hear about in your presentations and even Peter's, about this idea of darkness as well, that it's not all about brightness and lightness, that there is, we need to think about what is the role of darkness in our cities. And in particular, I'm interested in urban wildlife. So there's a whole bunch of other, not just humans that come out at night in the 24-hour city, but particularly this time of year, and particularly in London, over our green spaces and over our blue spaces, is there's a lot of bats. There are owls, we all know urban foxes who don't seem to be too shy of the light, but yeah, to what extent are some of those other ecological factors included in your field and thinking about the future?
Yes, the ecological aspect is part of the planning assessment requirement as well, in sort of light where they are. In the city centres, knowing that there's a bats populations and a bats kind of preferred route, dark corridors need to be created if it's not already there. And a lot of time with viaducts, currently with overground trains, that is the dark corridor naturally, and trying to preserve that. But the knowledge about bat population, how, when they're going to be active, was based on past research that was, from now looking at it, it could be quite limited. And some of the sort of latest technology I was talking about using is this Internet of Things, kind of sensors, to truly monitor it in a sort of more year-round of how these kind of nocturnal animals, how they're active, what they preferred. So giving the design community to practice a lot more, hopefully the better standards to work with, so that we can really design in a more holistic way than based on so limited knowledge. So we're constantly looking at bats, turtles, everything, how they sort of use light to guide them and live around it. So Duncan is over there. He's been doing a lot of work in measuring about backed activities using digital technology. So maybe afterwards catch up with him.
Stephen Cannonbrooks, IDE lighting consultant and restaurateur. All of the panel, I think, have mentioned the word health. But one of the challenges we have is that we talk about health as a sort of, it's not something any of us are actually directly involved in. And I think one of our big challenges is to connect ourselves with what really we mean by health and what other people mean by health. Because we're mostly doing this by proxy. Our past history, which we've heard about over the last 50 years or more, has focused on performance, on comfort and other issues. And I think one of the things which, as we look forwards, we're beginning to understand that we need to actually look at a much wider range of factors and bring them together. So I was wondering if I could invite the panel to at least speculate for the next 40 years about what those may be.
I suppose I was just going to respond to the initial part of your question, which I think was a very valid point, but I think it would be certainly in the project, speaking personally, that the projects that I am involved in now and have been involved in over the last few years that relate to health, we've involved health experts in those projects, and as part of the multidisciplinary team that I think is essential to deal with these very complex set of issues. My background's physics, and I suppose many years ago I naively thought that if we did excellent science, one way or another, that would find its way through to impact. And I think after, well, probably too many years now, working on a range of projects, I think it's made me firstly realise that we do need these multidisciplinary teams. It's incredibly challenging to enable those teams to work effectively, I think. And as part of these type of projects, we need to have the full kind of range of health experts and professionals involved in the projects. But we also need to make sure that we're thinking very carefully about engagement and communication, and that we don't simply try to do excellent science, which is a given, I think, that we have to think very carefully about, right from the beginning, about our engagement and communication strategies. That probably didn't answer the second part of your question, but I'll pass over to somebody else now.
I think that's a very important point. Remember, we had a workshop and some policymaker came and at the end said, if you can convince us soundscape can promote health with hard evidence, we will put it in policy. So that's why I think at the moment the health issue in soundscape research is quite a hot topic. So there are two aspects. One is we are measuring physiological parameters, whether sound or good sound, bad sound can change heartbeat and blood pressure or this kind of indicators. On the other side, we study whether different soundscape can have restoration effect in terms of also evidence-wise, neuroscience evidence. So this is quite a hot topic. Many researchers are into it, and hopefully this can go beyond into policy.
Yeah, I think that, if I can say, then the health and well-being is becoming very similar to the green design a few years ago. I'm not going to call it a buzz because it's something that's really important and we ought to design and consider. But it's always about the evidence, and probably until, I mean, there are probably many people here in the room would have more information than me on in that topic, but until recently we started getting a lot of information on the impact of what we design or what we build on health and well-being, impact of noise, and it's been calculated and measured, impact of VOCs and material, impact of light, and of course with all those wearables we know the impact of movement on our health and well-being. So from the design of cities where you can walk, where you can enjoy outdoor, to design of a building where you can enjoy using the stairs, all of these do affect our health and they are measured. Now, similar to the smart cities or the data that's floating around us, we just need more time on all levels to digest these data and make use of it. But there is no doubt that if we want to focus on the users, i.e. us, it's not only on our thermal comfort or indoor environmental qualities, but as well as how we're going to use the space, how we're going to be healthier using the space.
Yes, I think the World Health Organization definition of health is absence of disease, which none of us clearly know anything about. I think well-being is an interesting issue, and I think that if we start to think of the human as a whole organism, whole body, and start to think about how, so for example, in lighting, we typically just look at vision, but if we start to combine that with other senses, for example, sound, touch, temperature, and look at fields, biologists, neuroscience, all these top areas, and get them to input into what we do, then we can probably be more relevant overall.
Here again, if I can just say something, probably as well ask it needs specialists, and specialism. So picking on the specialist's brain is quite important to feed into what we do, and this is again bringing more and more people from different backgrounds together.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think that was a really interesting and stimulating discussion. So if you can all join me in thanking our panel.